Excellent. All right. So I've got on the slide our panelists. I'm very, very excited to have today as part of the webinar and sharing the thoughts and insights, Ross. Ross is the Group Director of Employee Experience at Domain. Ross, hi and welcome. Thank you. And
hello.
I've had the pleasure of working with Ross while I was doing an assignment with Fairfax, and Ross has subsequently moved on to Domain. Also have from Singapore, joining us, Sasha White. Sasha is the Director of ServiceNow Alliance and Powered HR for KPMG for the APAC and Japan. So really happy to have Sasha on board. Hopefully will also kind of give us that Asian perspective as to what's happening in EX. So Sasha, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
We also have Jerome. So Jerome is a very experienced EX practitioner, and you'll see that when he presents his slides. Kind of share with us the methods and the realities of working in EX. So Jerome's got a lot of experience, including organizations like Qantas, and I believe Jerome Optus, which is where I think we both worked probably together at the same time. So welcome.
Optus, yes, thank you.
Fantastic. So, all right. So we'll jump, straight into the content. So, just in terms of the flow for the session, what we have is we'll spend the first 15 minutes setting the context, but also sharing some research and stats with you about EX and what it is and what it means. After that, we'll move to the presenters or the panelists who will present either a point of view or a best practice they'll share with us, and also respond to the case study, which we'll share with you. And hopefully that case study, if you've got any thoughts on the case study and what the solution should be for Anne, just share it with us on the chat window. After that, we'll just have a quick discussion, Q&A, about the impact on employee experience, answer any questions that you might have to the best of our ability, and finally, we'll also talk about the next steps. So we do have some concrete next steps for you if you're interested. So just a quick couple of minutes about EX Assembly. We've just started EX Assembly about 4 months back, and it's gained a lot of traction, which has been quite good. But EX Assembly is a community of professionals like all of us here, trying to have a frank discussion about EX, but more importantly, I think it's the focus on practice, the practice of EX. We know there are lots of great thought leaders out there about EX, the McKinseys and the Accentures and the IBMs of the world. But certainly, it's that what we focus on is how do you translate that thought leadership or that strategy into something that practically works in complex organizations with a lot of limitations? So it's practice leadership is the focus. In terms of what we do and what's on the roadmap, we already have meetups, and Shreya will share with you the links for the meetups. If you can join the meetups at the moment Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, but there are plans to start up in other countries and cities. We do have webinars every month like this one, so please do sign up to join the webinar. The next one I shall share with you shortly. What we'd love to do is organize the unconference, which I guess is under planning, but we've just put it on hold because of COVID at the moment. We also have started the exercise of generating and sharing best practices. We'll be announcing the EX Awards very soon, and I'm very pleased to actually share some information on the 2 collaborative projects that we've just kicked off yesterday. Apart from that, we also provide workshop certification and EX consulting if it is required. So just to let you know in terms of the topics, and we've got a theme for each month. In May, it was about building scalable organizational learning. In June, we focused on candidate experience. It was an excellent webinar, and we have recorded that in case you want to watch it on our website. This month is about unpacking EX, and next month is about employee wellness, and quite an interesting situation about discussion about really, in terms of employee wellness, what are the boundaries for the organization? So, how much should they be involved and not? So that's coming up. We also have the EX Excellence Awards and the meetups, that are available. So just another just a quick one, couple of minutes on EX Collab. So EX Collab, which we only kicked off yesterday, is basically a group of practitioners like ourselves getting together and trying to solve a real pain point in the organization for EX, right? And then with the intention of discussing, trying to come up with a solution if we can, and then sharing with the wider community kind of in an open source approach. So that's kicked off. It comprises of 4 stages, which kind of follows the classic, design thinking approach, and we'll share the details with you, and it's also available on the website. I'm really hoping that you can participate in this in the collabs and help shape the discussion around EX. Very quickly, the participation will be over 3 to 4 months and about 2 hours per week, and it will be a series of facilitated discussions, possibly some workshops, and the whole idea is to come up with some concrete outputs, either a white paper or an actual solution which is tested and available to the community. So the 2 collabs that we've kicked off, and we've got some fantastic leads, for that. The first one is around the one that actually confounded Rob Wilkins, and some of you might know Rob Wilkins. He's with New South Wales Education, and he heads up the information systems there. And it is about the constant frustration that organizations have because they've got all this people data available in different parts and different systems of the organization, which don't necessarily talk to each other. And hence, the information is not personalized for employees. So it's that, how do we solve this issue of the lack of integration and siloization of this information to actually make more productive information available to employees. So Rob is going to lead that. We also have Sasha leading the second one, which is around optimizing search for improved candidate experience and acquisition outcomes. It's an interesting one because search is so important search is so important in the whole aspect of the search process. And I've just unmuted Sasha. So Sasha, if you want to just say hello and just kind of introduce the collab, that'll be fantastic.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Hi, everyone. So just a quick intro, a bit about me. I've got about 13 years of talent acquisition experience, both in-house and client side. And I've worked across different markets. And now I'm currently in Australia. So also a candidate looking for a job. So this topic is quite dear to my heart, but also thinking from candidate experience side. So what we're aiming to hopefully find a solution for is that no matter the ATS or whether it's LinkedIn or whichever platform candidates are using to apply, there is some sort of challenge in terms of either feedback or uploading an application, etc. So what we're hoping to achieve here is coming up with very practical solutions that people can take away and start implementing in their wider HR teams. If we can, I feel it is a huge topic. So we do need a lot of research and thought process around this, but I'm hoping that we would have some workable solutions that we can take away.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks. And yeah, really looking forward to both these collabs, and they're great problems to solve. And they're also, I think we've got some really great leaders leading the group, and it is a collaborative effort. So please do sign up. We'll send you the link in the chat window for that. Okay, so some quick stats about the participation of this webinar, the registration specifically. So we had about 66% are HR L&D professionals, about 70% call themselves EX or CX professionals. Others were about 10%, and the business team managers were around 6%. So that's your breakup. So predominantly HR, OD, and L&D, which is but natural. In terms of the location, we've got majority from Sydney, and then from Melbourne, Brisbane, some from Singapore, and India, and even some from the US. So hopefully they are online listening to this. So thank you very much for registering and joining us. The question we asked during the registration process was, what is your interest in EX? So it was really good to see that about 50% of the people responded that they are already kind of practitioners of EX and want to learn more. So I think this is a great webinar to learn a little bit more about the implementing EX. About 18% said I'm new to EX and want to build EX skills and knowledge, which is great because again, we've got some thoughts on how to progress on skills and capabilities, especially for HR folks. And about 32% said I just want to know a little bit more about EX. So hopefully by the end of this webinar, you will know a little and want to know a lot more. So hopefully you'll follow EX Assembly or the panelists on LinkedIn who have a lot of insights and experience in this space. We also asked a question about what is your current opinion about EX. Interestingly, 51%, as you would expect, said that it is applying CX approach to employees. Another 36% said it's a next stage of evolution of HR. 9%, I thought this number might be higher, but 9% said they don't know. And the reason why I thought it might be higher is because there isn't too much clarity, or it isn't it's not a structured approach as yet. It's lots of different things coming into the EX market. So it's a very valid response, but good to see that it's not that high. 4% were a little cynical, and it's always good to have cynics because, this could be the start of the enthusiasm curve. And, when we hit realities like the Gartner curve, might be more difficult, but need to get through the end. So it's nice to have, people in the mix who are taking a more cynical approach to any new trend, I guess. Actually, I wouldn't mind checking with the panel in terms of their thoughts on, just the statistics on the slide there. So Sasha, any thoughts on those stats? Do you more or less agree with them? You're on mute. Yep. All right, let me unmute you. Okay.
There we go.
There you go.
Here I am. I'm not surprised in the slightest. I think 51% for applying customer experience approach to employees is about the same as what I've seen when I talk to clients about how do we define EX. So no surprises from me, but I don't know. Ross, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I'd probably say I'd agree with that. I think I'd probably sit somewhere in the middle between, I think it is an opportunity for HR to transform itself. But I also think there's a lot of insight and learnings from the customer experience space that we should be bringing in and recognising that diversity of thoughts is a really good idea.
Jerome, your thoughts?
I agree with what Ross just said. I think it's somewhere in between the HR, evolution of HR and the customer experience approach to employees. And the reason I'm saying that is because I see EX as more than just HR. It's a lot more broader than this, and sometimes people feel that it's just restricted to evolving human resources, well, traditional HR, which is where sometimes the challenge is. So yeah, somewhere in between 51 and 36%.
Thank you. So just moving on to the next stat. The question we asked, and this was a forced choice, and there were limited choices, so take that with a grain of salt. But the question we asked was, what is the highest priority for EX in your organization? 53% said improve motivation and engagement of employees. The next highest response was involve employees in the design of HR people processes, 20%. The next one was 17% was for personalized for employees, and one size HR doesn't fit for all. And number 4 was reduce complexity and time for employees to complete HR stuff. So I'm just checking if Ross, maybe any thoughts on the stat results?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of the motivation for me does make sense. I think it's also about, I guess, picking up on what Joan and I were alluding to is, and I guess this is one of the challenges I face in my business, is that in terms of the employee experience, it extends way outside the HR team. So what's the employee experience from a manager's perspective? What's the employee experience from the IT team's perspective, or the finance systems? And so I think I quite like the complexity in time for employees to do stuff, but I'd actually cross out HR and say complexity in time to do stuff, whatever that stuff might be in the organisation, whether that be their expenses or their leave or get a new software system or just function as a human being within the business. So that would be my view.
Great. Jerome, any thoughts?
Yes, I think EX is really, it's really to reducing the complexity and time for employees to do their job, basically. But beyond the options that are there, I feel like one of the priority for EX in an organization is for people to be proud of working for this organization, and for them to become advocates beyond the walls of the organization. So when they are at a barbecue at a weekend, they're just proud to talk about the work they do in the organization they're working for. And that's part of the experience that an organization should provide.
Thank you very much. So moving on to the next step. Okay, so let's talk about some definitions. We did some research on exactly what is EX, and there are as many number of definitions as the people you ask. We kind of looked at the more reputed sources. Gartner defines employee experience as how employees internalize and interpret the interactions they have within their organization, contexts that influence those interactions, as you can see on the screen. And they've actually done some research in terms of the linkage between business benefits of EX, and they have some real solid statistics about how retention, customer satisfaction, organization reputation all increases with improving EX. One of the things you can see, which is outlined, is the red box called discretionary effort, which I'll come to shortly, because if we have a look at the IBM Smarter Workforce Institute's definition, it's also defined on similar lines, which is a set of perceptions that employees have about their experience at work in response to their interactions with the organization. And they actually kind of have a framework which talks about the connection of all the things that we know in HR. And again, the employee experience, which they've kind of focused on the dark blue box, which is belonging, purpose, achievement, happiness, and rigor. And the outcomes are work performance, and again, discretionary effort. So this term has come common in both definitions, and I've kind of been reading about this. But basically what this is employees wanting to go over and beyond their job description, right? And that's what they say is better EX leads to that, and it's becoming quite an important term, because I think the relationship between employers and employees is also is changing with time. So how much discretionary effort they put in is going to be challenging. But the question for the panel, just around the definitions, is by just looking at the definition, they kind of seem to be overarching, fairly generic, high-level definitions. Do you think that practitioners, people who want to put this in practice, might struggle with this high-level definition? Any thoughts of that?
I guess I would say, not one of my frustrations, but one of my observations about EX or EX practice and the definitions is, we shouldn't get caught up in gatekeeping what EX is as a thing within our organizations. I think very simplistically about your experience as an employee yourself, or your experience as a customer, and work back from there. You're not going to be half wrong. It is, the descriptions that you talk through, Stephen, are pretty standard. You're right. But I don't think we need to overcomplicate it more than this, that it is what it is. It's how employees feel about coming to work. It's how they talk about going to work. It's, how involved they are when they are at work. It's a combination of all of those things. So at least that's my view anyway.
Ross, any thoughts on that?
I probably absolutely concur with what Sasha said. And I think as well, the other piece for me is, and I guess this is where it becomes a point of difference. The point of difference is around, if you have a good employee experience, the point of difference is that discretionary effort. And I think, as Jerome mentioned earlier, people who are really proud. So when you are standing at the barbecue and you're asked where you work, do you want to say X, or do you want to just pretend that you don't have a job? So I think that's the other part of it for me.
Thank you. We'll just move on to the next slide. Jerome, I'll ask your thoughts here. Look, we've kind of landed on as EX Assembly, probably landed on a definition which is from McKinsey, which we like better, and because it's a mix of the high-level statement plus what it means. So what they've said is it's companies and employees working together to create personalized, authentic experiences that ignite passion and tap into purpose to strengthen, and this I like, is strengthen individual, team, and company performance. So there is an outcome focus for all of these, and this is kind of the framework we've put together. The difference, I think, Sasha will share with you, and also Jerome, is that they're kind of three distinct, spheres in EX, including physical and the organizational. But I think while there that top triangle is there. I think what is really important, at least from our point of view, is recognizing that the employee's personal journey also needs to be considered quite significantly in the design of EX, right? So what's happening at home, what's happening with their career, what's happening with their financial stability should feed into the design of EX a lot more than just considering organizational realities. So it's a model that we're still evolving, and love to have your feedback. We also recognize that that really, I think the more accurate term should be workforce experience rather than employee experience. We started with EX because it is a term that everyone knows, but at some point in time, we'll really need to, at least as EX Assembly, need to revisit that. Some stats from Gartner again is that what they've said is that about 55% are neutral and 29% agree that HR really doesn't understand what people understand what people want, right? So that's quite a big number where they're neutral, or 16% say they disagree. So only 1/3 agree that HR understand employees. The next one is HR's involvement in terms of HR's involvement in involving employees, and 72% disagree, and only 28% agree. So I think this is an area of huge improvement that can be had through involving employees, which is natural because they are your customers, in the end. So some stats there. What I want to move now is very quickly to the case study about Anne, who's a new EX manager in a professional services firm with 5,000 employees, and recently set up EX function. Reports to the HR tech manager, and then to the head of HR. The HR tech manager is not really sure if EX really helps or adds value. So that's a bit of a challenge for Anne. But Anne's been told to improve employee engagement, which will be measured through the employment survey. So that's also interesting. And also, show that, hey, we're doing something in EX so that EX can be, so HR can be seen to be forward-looking. And I think I was sharing this case study with Jerome, and he said, "Oh my God, this is so close to reality in some of the organizations that I've worked for." So it was uncanny. And what Anne has done is, as part of Anne's strategy, try to educate HR on the value of EX, try to get involved in HR tech projects, work with the engagement team to improve score and building on skills on CX, but none of them have really worked. So either HR is very busy and therefore they can't do much, or the exact value add of EX hasn't been defined and therefore there is a reluctance. So we'd love to hear from the panelists about what they think, but I'm going to pass it on to Ross. So Ross, over to you, and we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Stephen. As you mentioned, I currently reside at Domain and lead the employee experience team. But you can also see there that I've spent a bit of time at Fairfax, which is obviously where Jeevan and I first came across each other. One of my probably more interesting parts of my career that I love to talk about is the time I spent in Samoa for a year volunteering as part of the Australian Youth Ambassadors for Development scheme. That was an opportunity for me to go and work in the Public Service Commission of Samoa and really help coach and guide the changes under the new public service legislation there, and grow and develop the capability of those HR practitioners in the ministries of Samoa. So next slide, thanks, Jerome. So let's talk about Domain. So our structure here is a fairly standard structure in terms of we have people solutions, organisational capability awards and systems, and business partnering. We have a range of different skills in my team: human-centred design, lawyer, learning and development. A couple of them are yoga teachers. Coaching skills, office experience. I think I left off auditing. I've deliberately tried to build a really diverse skill set within my team because I think that allows us to approach problems in a much more interesting way, and allow us to try and think outside the square. And we also do try and involve our business in our problems and opportunities that we're trying to solve. So if we go to the next slide, thanks.
Ross, can I just check, because this office experience is an interesting one. So what does that involve?
So office experience is essentially the office manager, for want of a better word. So they're the ones who look after the facilities, make sure the office is humming, but they also run all the social events and birthday cakes every month, and monthly drinks and trivia competitions and right now they're keeping us safe from COVID, so they put little doorstops underneath the door so we can open with our feet that's a really nice experience because then I don't have to trust the door handle in the bathroom. So really that kind of broad office experience. Yeah.
Thanks, Ross.
So just in terms of some stuff that we've done, and again, I probably can't take credit for this particular one, but onboarding of employees into Domain has long been something that this team has excelled at. And just to build on some of the commentary that Jerome and I spoke about, this actually goes beyond the EE team to our IT, super friendly IT help desk. So we have a very good approach and operation that's very smooth now from when the person is essentially recruited in, offered the role, on online onboarding forms. There's a system that we use. Are we allowed to talk about systems? Is it allowed? Onboarder, but it sends alerts out, but the IT help desk are part of that. So back to that employee experience, it doesn't stop with my team. It actually extends all the way to them selecting what laptop they get, IT induction, and that whole day one, for want of a better word, and the office experience in an ordinary world would do a tour of the office. In a virtual world, they have virtual tours, and then they have a virtual welcoming you session. So it's an end-to-end experience for the employee, which extends beyond employee experience, and we get amazing feedback on that. One of the things that really needed to happen for Domain when our new CEO turned up was based on feedback from the staff, was to really get in and sort out what our purpose and our value should be. The comment made previously to me was the previous ones were made up by the head of EE who sat in the room with the ELTs. They didn't mean anything to anyone. So we deliberately went through an appreciative inquiry process. We had 10% of our staff in a room working things through. So we absolutely engaged the employees in the process. As part of our trying to do things a little bit differently, innovative company, and I guess tech people, we used virtual reality to try and build empathy as part of our diversity and inclusion training. So we had 2 virtual reality sessions where people put the goggles on and experienced what it was like to be excluded from a conversation and what it was like to have someone stand over you. And we had a guy who's 6'3", and he said in the debrief session, wow, that's the first time anyone's ever stood over me in my whole life. And there was a 5'3" girl sitting next to him saying, welcome to my world, it happens 20, 30 times a day. So it's just about the different experiences. I'm also responsible for corporate social responsibility, and so I've deliberately set up staff engagement groups, again, to help us solve problems in terms of what we want to do in the organisation. Some of you may be familiar with the leadership shadow, so we've brought that into a practical application in the leadership charter, and we roll that out of the organisation in terms of what you do as a leader, how you do it, the impact that you actually have, and that's really important from an employee experience perspective. And the last one's quite close to my heart in the sense that I had a member of my team, if we talk about moments that matter and personal experiences, I had a member of my team who did have a stillbirth, and I obviously worked through that with her, but what came about from that was a realisation that our parental leave policy didn't honour that moment or didn't represent that moment, and we changed that at that time. So that's a really something quite small for one person, but it actually will now have a massive impact, and that was her asking that question, and I think that was a really great question to ask me. So next slide, thanks, Jeevan. So really, what are our opportunities? I love talking about moments that matter. I wouldn't say Domain does it brilliantly. We are trying to find those things and work on them, but managers also need to understand their impact, and if it's one person at a time, we'll get there. We've had a massive lift in our engagement score as a result of our response to COVID. We've really taken a people-first approach, and in the next slide, I'll talk about one of those examples, a crisp example there. We are really trying to build that inclusive culture so people feel like they belong, and that is really about wanting to come to work, do your best work, and Domain being somewhere where they want to hang out and have great career experiences. And we're also starting to work with our consumer team because, like I said, you can get a lot of learnings from how you do customer experience and bring that in. And so from that perspective, we're trying to learn from our consumer buddies in terms of how they do customer experience. Next slide, thank you. So this is just one example of us and what we've done, and I've given you 2 quotes here from some employees. We ran a project, it's called Project Zipline. It has actually been out in the press, and it was really Domain thinking differently about how we managed through COVID in order to get some cost savings that every sort of organisation needed to do, and rather than go down the traditional route that an HR team would normally, we had a CEO, Jason Pellegrino, who thought outside the square, went to the board and asked for share rights. And so we went about our project we did it in about 5 or 6 weeks, where we got 90% acceptance of our staff to either reduce their salaries in replacement of share rights or reduce their days to 4 days a week for a 6-month period. So it provided certainty for our employees. There was a lot of work that went behind the scenes, legal, tax, communications. My payroll guys needed to get stuff done, but the way the business has come together as a result of that, and the way we have seen a massive positivity about what we do, and that discretionary effort, and people really being proud to work here, is probably, like I said, probably one of my resume moments as the leader of the employee experience team. And the fact that we have been able to do that at this stage has meant that at no point have we had to stand someone down or make someone redundant through COVID-19. So a people-first approach and making sure that we work through the experience of the individuals and the categories of employees that we have: full-time, part-time, visas, people on parental leave, people who might have been in financial hardship. So it was a pretty intense period, but one that we're pretty proud of, and we definitely like to talk about it. Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Ross. And I think we've got some questions we all want to ask, but we'll just park it for the Q&A session at the end. And we'll go next to Sasha. So Sasha, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Stephen. So I'll try and keep it relatively short, conscious of time, want to get straight to the questions. I'm based here in Singapore, as you can tell, originally from the UK. Unfortunately, fortunately, I don't know how to put that right now. So I have almost 10 years of experience. I started out my career in HR, so I've been an internal in-house HR person pretty much most of my career up until a couple of years ago, where I moved to the dark side of consulting in the UK before moving to Singapore and joining KPMG. So my experience is primarily in HCM and HRSD implementation. My current role is centered around HR transformation in the context of HCM and HRSD, and I spend a lot of my time talking to clients about ServiceNow's HR service delivery solution, which many of you will probably be very familiar with. And I guess to finish off, I'm probably most passionate about the design process of employee experience, which I'll come on to talk a little bit about, but I think naturally I'm quite a creative person, so creating that space for HR leaders and teams to think creatively about EX is really, really exciting for me. So go to the next slide. So I'd kind of break this down into 3 sections. This is my state of mind of EX at the moment. The first thing I'd say around my view is it's pretty standard, and I think you kind of got that gist when I spoke about this earlier, but I think about employee experience in the way that many of us do. It's a combination of digital experiences, physical experiences, and life cycle experiences, which a lot of people would call culture or process experience. And I think, you know, I've spent a bit of time reflecting on this, and when I think about myself as an employee of KPMG or previous to this, it's all of these 3 components that drive my emotional response to my employer, and it drives my discretionary effort, my passion to talk about my employer, and really just from a career planning perspective, where I want to go next. And I think, yeah, it's pretty standard, nothing groundbreaking here, but that's my view. My passion, very briefly, I've got 3 images. The first one is Gen Z, students coming into the workplace, whether they are with or without a degree. You know, how are we creating a workplace that is supporting that transition from student experience to employee experience? The second is, again, design process. So super passionate about moving away from your standard process workshops to something a bit more creative, really leveraging that design thinking. Feel free to reach out to me if you want to talk at length about this. I could chew your ear off over that one. And then the last one is equality. And I think this leads me into what am I asking? You know, I really think that we as EX practitioners and HR leaders really need to think about how employee experience design has an influence on diversity and inclusion in the workplace. So I think for a long time we talk about how policies shape that or internal processes, but actually we really need to be thinking about that when we think about how we design onboarding or re-onboarding from maternity leave or whatever it is. So that leads me on to my, what am I pondering at the moment? And I'd love to get your thoughts on this in the chat or at the end, but what does the new normal do for EX as we know it today? And I'm not just talking about virtual working, but, we've kind of designed this gold standard of onboarding experience. How does that change? And who's going to come up first, right? I think we're all refreshing the Google to see, whose onboarding experience has shifted and who's publicized it first. I think that's really key. And I think the second one is, we can't ignore what has been in the press over the last few weeks. How can employee experience help to make the workforce truly diverse and inclusive? So that's really key. So just on to the next one. So Jeevan asked me to talk very briefly about EX for large organizations and what I would give as advice to clients or people I'd worked with previously. So I've done it quite simply here, maybe not something new to many of you here, but I think firstly starting off with defining the why, and I think a lot of this thinking comes from Jacob Morgan, who most of us are familiar with, which is why do we operate as a business? What is our end goal for our customers? And then let's work back from there. And I think it sounds really simple, but it helps to just provide a bit more context to why we're doing what we're doing. The second one is leveraging your knowledge, which I'm not going to spend time talking about now because my next slide is on this one. The third is looking for quick wins. Again, pretty obvious, but I think Anne, the case study that we talk about, she's got all kinds of cultural, organizational challenges that she needs to navigate. Just focus on what you can get done and use that as a showcase for how employee experience can add value. So whether it's starting with an onboarding experience or it's even just looking at the onboarding pack or your maternity process, just pick one. Get it over the line, really show the value and start from there. Otherwise it gets a bit daunting. Fourth would be investing in a change journey. So pretty obvious one here, but just going out and saying we're investing in EX or we've designed onboarding to create a better employee experience is quite transactional. And I think what we're talking about in the term for EX as an organization is transformational, right? So I think we need to invest in that change journey with our managers and leaders, really take them on the journey of how to help them own the manager experience and employee experience as well. And then the last one is investing in capability. So whether that's helping to train your existing HR teams. So like me, I'm in-house HR, moved more so into the EX space. Really invest in your team's capability. And if you have the gaps, don't be afraid to bring people on board to help you out as well. So I suppose the last, tips, I've put them in the corner here. Design before technology. I, like probably many of us, I get swooned by amazing technology at EX conferences, and I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. Let's design around this solution. I would always say design before you look at tech tools. Don't stop at onboarding. I know onboarding is a really popular EX topic and it's really key for an organization, but it doesn't stop there. And then I'd say be bold, and I think this is more in the context of ideas. So think big, of course be realistic, but don't be afraid to think outside of the box and do something a bit different, because that's where real innovation is. So just on to the next slide.
Sasha, can I just interrupt you with a question here? Because usually, and also to the rest of the panel, usually the first time organizations or HR hear about an EX is when somebody's appointed as an EX manager or head of EX. It's almost like there's not too much discussion that's happened before to bring everyone in the tent, and there's this person saying, I'm doing EX now, so let's work together. And do you think it might be a more prudent approach to actually have that conversation with the larger HR group and build some consensus before an EX person is bought in? Because once they're bought in, it's like, oh, he's an EX person, he needs to earn his salary or her salary, and needs to meet the KPIs, so just doing too much. Any thoughts from you, Sasha, or Jerome, or Ross?
I think it depends, right, on the culture of the organisation and ultimately how progressive the HR teams are. If we're talking about an old school organisation who's maybe just quite new to the transformation, bringing in an EX manager, you're kind of setting them up to fail a little bit, or potentially setting them up to fail. So I do think socialisation of the concept of EX is really key. But Jerome, what do you think?
Yeah, agree with that. And again, linked to the point I made earlier, beyond HR is when you establish or when you hire a EX manager. Obviously, HR needs to be across the concept of EX, etc. But a lot of the times, the CX team is not across it. And we always say that EX equals CX, but there's almost no link between employee experience and customer experience in the workplace. There are two different teams working in isolation more often than not. So I think involving the larger organizations, so HR, of course, but also CX, the CX teams, customer teams is also as important as just involving HR.
Yeah.
Ross, any thoughts?
I would always look at the context, and the context of the organisation is important. And I think there needs to be an openness to the conversation, because if people aren't open to the concept, then you're not going to win that. You're not going to win that battle. And so, just bringing in a role, whether that's an EX manager or any other type of manager, you need to have the willingness and the desire to change within an organisation. Otherwise, as Sasha said, they're going to be set up to fail.
Yeah, sure. So I think just kind of zoning in on one of those tips, if you like, for large organisations very briefly. When I say leverage your knowledge, I mean outside of HR. Internal HR knowledge is really key, but first point I would say is cross-functional collaboration is really key. So when you're developing a pilot or a proof of concept, or something very quick and dirty on paper, why don't you involve your UX design teams, product innovation teams, customer service teams as well, and just really draw on their experiences. I think Jerome's going to touch on that more on his slides. Second is functional experience. So this is kind of interlinked, but when you're going through the process of designing or redesigning your onboarding, really take the time to understand service management outside of HR. How are IT managing service management? How do customer service management teams manage their customer relations? Like, it's all really useful knowledge. And then the last one is user research. So we all go out and we talk to employees, although apparently, according to some of your stats, Stephen, that's maybe less so than I expected. But, look beyond your HR UX research and really ask, how do our employees interact with IT? How do they interact with legal and facilities? Because that's all such useful information as well. And I think, again, to my last point, think outside the box, but manage your time really effectively and be realistic about what you want to achieve. So
Thanks.
to go on to the next slide and last slide, this would be my response. Yeah, Anne's case study. And I don't want to steal any more of Jerome's time, but I think really what I think Anne should do is start small, show value, and just get stuck in. I've made a few assumptions here that the CHRO is a bit difficult to work with and isn't going to be convinced to move them to a more senior position or a more cross-functional position. So I think, keep it simple, be really clear on setting expectations as to what EX is and is not, understand the engagement targets, and yeah, just start small and show value. Really invest in your training. I know Anne is not an experienced EX practitioner. That is okay. Learn on the job, show some value, and I'm sure she's going to do fantastically well.
Thank you very much, Sasha. And over to Jerome now. So Jerome, over to you, sir.
All right. So my background a bit different to the other panel members. I'm a scientist by background, and then ended up working in the innovation space, first in the UK, and then in Australia, and slowly moved to the employee experience space, applying design thinking methodologies and other innovation methodologies to design experiences for employees across a range of organizations, including telco, aviation, and government department here in New South Wales. So quite broad, diverse experience, but not OD HR background, which sometimes can be useful because I see things from a different lens. So I would tend to challenge a lot what's happening in organizations, which can sometimes be a problem. But next slide, please. So yes, what I'm going to talk today is I'm going to talk about some of the approaches I've taken to use customer experience best practices and approach to enhance and design the employee experience. So next slide, please. So we hear a lot about how employee experience equal customer experience, but that's, as I said earlier, there's a lot more teams that should be involved in the design and implementation, adoption of employee experience. So on this slide, I just explained how employee experience can drive customer outcomes, but in turn, customer outcomes also drive business outcomes. And that's something that we don't necessarily talk about. You did in your slide, Jivan, a bit earlier with your shareholder experience, which would be shareholder outcomes. So in this slide, I just summarize everything very, very high level. So next slide. Okay, so we talk about a lot about employee experience, working with HR, etc. One of the first things that I feel employee experience needs is time and a lot of data. And sometimes a lot of organizations want to implement or adopt employee experience without necessarily spending the time to do the research. And doing research is looking at the qualitative data, but also the quantitative data, talking to people, going on site, going across different locations, and really talking to people, immersing yourself in their role, and also looking at all the data that you've got from surveys. A lot of organizations run engagement surveys every year. They've got feedback, written feedback. They don't necessarily analyze it. So it's worth spending time looking at all these different data points, qualitative and quantitative data points, to really understand the challenges that people are facing, the pain points they've got, doing their work, whether it's the access to the right technologies, working in the right environment, and also the culture. A lot of the thing that I've heard working across a range of organizations is people don't necessarily feel aligned to the purpose. And how can you have an engaged employee or provide a great employee experience when your employees don't feel aligned or don't even understand what the purpose of the organization is? So it's a key point that drives the experience, and that's things that you can get from talking to people, being empathetic towards your people, and also observing and immersing yourself. Next slide, please. So once you've got all this data, what you can do is adopting an approach that the customer space is adopting, which is mapping the moments that matter. So Ross already talked about it, and moments that matter are very important. So if you look at an organization as an employee, moments that matter start from the moment an employee is actually interested in applying for a job. So you look at the candidate experience, then you look at the interview experience, the onboarding, and then all the way to the exit. So the moment an employee exits the organization, whether that's through a redundancy, whether that's through resignation, retirement, so what's the experience that you actually provide your people? And then you can look beyond just the exiting experience. That could be the alumni experience. How do you stay in touch with people who have worked with you? How can you leverage their skills and experience if you need these skills and experience to address challenges that you're facing in your organization? Moments that matter include anything to do with the perks, the training, the transition to another role, promotion experience. So it's really broad. And with each of these moments that matter, you've got technologies that people need to use to go through these moments that matter. The different contact points that they have to go through, the people they need to talk to. So the employee journey and the emotional journey that people go through can vary quite a lot from one moment that matter to another. So you apply for a role, that can be a very exciting time. Then you get invited to an interview. That's a great experience. You're very high on your emotional journey. And then you get offered the job, so that's even better. But then you get the onboarding experience. And if the onboarding experience is not up to scratch or meets the emotional journey that you've had through the recruitment experience, then you reach a low. And that starts damaging the view and the experience that you've got working for the organization. Next slide, please. So another thing that you can do using data, so data, qualitative and quantitative data, is design employee persona. So again, the customer experience space does it quite a lot to understand the people they actually, what the customers actually have, and also use this persona to design services or products to address the needs of this persona. So organization can replicate the same approach for the employees, understanding the mindsets, the behaviors, the tech savviness, for instance, the loyalty, overall engagement of their people, so they can design products, services, and experiences that are tailored to the specific persona. So that can be a very tactical approach to design an onboarding experience, to design a tech experience, a digital experience, to design a performance management experience for each persona. But that can also be something that's a lot more strategic. So one thing that you could do is once you've got your persona, you can size this persona. So what type of persona do you have across your organization, across each work group? So whether that's frontline, whether it's corporate office, etc. And that can give you a good idea of what you've got in your organization right now. And being strategic, you can then think, okay, we think this persona A is quite good for the organization going forward, looking at where we want to be in 5 or 10 years' time. So it's worth looking at ways to increase this representation across specific work groups. And then you can then look at designing strategies to get to this endpoint. So what type of strategies or initiatives should we design to reach this endpoint of representation of X persona in the workforce? So that can be very tactical, but also very strategic for the long term, to design the organization of the future based on the mindset and behaviors you want in your organization. Next slide, please. So again, something to collect data and get more insight out of your people is developing employee research programs, basically. So we hear a lot of organizations having yearly engagement surveys. Is that enough? Most of the time, it's not enough. You really want to understand how your people feel at every single key moments that matter. So whether it's your onboarding experience, whether it's when you've got a promotion or when you're exiting, so that's the kind of usual moments that matter. But then we had COVID recently. Did organizations survey their people when COVID hit them? So how did people feel about COVID? Did they feel safe? Did they have any worries, etc.? So understanding how people feel all the time on an ongoing basis is very important. So surveying them at moments that matter, and when key events happen also that impact their experience or that could impact their experience in the workplace. And again, that's adopting something that the customer experience space is in adopting on an ongoing basis, surveying customers on an ongoing basis. And we did it for COVID, and we should do it for our employees as well. Next slide, please. Finally, another tool that could be used for employees that's being used in the customer space is the employer value proposition. So just like organizations design product services to that add value and differentiate themselves, well, help differentiate themselves from the competition, and it's worth organization exploring designing an employer value proposition. So you can look at designing an EVP to attract, engage, and retain talent overall. But you can also look at designing specific EVP segment for talent, or segment talent that you're looking to attract. That could be Digitech talent, for instance. And that's about representing and promoting your organization so you attract the right people, and you also promote what your organization is all about for this specific work group. Sasha talked about Gen Z, millennial, etc. Now we know that these people are very tech savvy. They work on their phone. They rely on their phone to do everything. Now, if you want to attract these people, you need to make sure that the technologies and tools that you offer as an organization matches the expectation of these people, of this specific segment. So it's very important to sell your organization the way it is, and if you need to adapt and new technologies to ensure that whatever expectations Gen Z and millennials have are met in your organization, then it's definitely worth the investment to attract and retain people. So AVP is a tool that's very important and very valuable to attract, retain, and engage people in the organization. So I think we've got 5 minutes left. I think that was my last slide. It's really, yes, yeah.
It was, and look, I'm going to skip over my solution for the case study because it aligns with everybody else's, except one thing I'd suggest is I'd ask Anne to get an experienced EX consultant in quickly, because you don't want to start off on the wrong foot by not having credibility. So if you're not skilled, people know your background. So get somebody in to while you're kind of selling and building the business case, to actually build some concrete framework and some methodology. So get somebody experienced like Jerome or Sasha or myself, or bring up Ross to get some information. It's critically important to have a good foundation. Now we've got a little couple of 3 points to make around why EX is not just CX applied to employees, right? So 2 of them are that the relationship between employers and employees is different from customer and a company, right? So in a lot of cases, the customer has the option of walking away from your product and services if they don't want to buy, right? Employees don't. They are within a certain compliance framework or employment relationship. So just keep in mind that there are subtle differences between CX and EX. The second one is, CX is all about generation of revenues or uptake of service, which is quite easy to quantify. And because it is easy to quantify, it's kind of contributing to the revenues. It is actually easier to get a budget and have a business case and be well resourced. The same might not be for EX. So you won't probably get the same amount of resources and money. You just need to be careful that don't set your expectations too high, especially in the beginning. And thirdly, which is close to my heart, is that for CX, you can actually track what you can do for customers a lot. So this stats is from actually EX Assembly website. I know where the customers are coming from, which part, what time, what are the pages that they come to and go to. So you can track that quite intimately. But can't be done for employees because you've got ethical and also legal considerations. And to be honest, if I'm working for an organization, I wouldn't like to be tracked everywhere I go. So we might not be able to get the same wealth of data that we do for CX. So we just need to take that into consideration. So technology might play less of a role. But I think that's where I want to probably just finish with a few questions, to the panel, starting with Ross. So Ross, if what are the 2 tips that you want to give to people or starting with EX in organizations? So the top 2 tips to them.
I think it's probably, it's one of Sasha's. She said start small. I think it's really thinking about what are the small wins that you can have to build on that credibility. And I'd also encourage the broader conversation outside of just the HR team. So make sure you are engaging wide on that stuff.
Thank you. And Sasha, just in terms of the top 2 challenges that you think organizations face in implementing EX.
So one you touched on, so showing the commercial gain from focusing on EX for the ROI. I think we have to be very careful and very clear. And set very clear expectations as to what is and isn't the return. I think that's one. I would probably say the second is contextually. Right now, there's a lot going on, and I think organizations that maybe wanted to embark on an EX journey might struggle now. But I personally believe now is the time more than ever to look at EX, but I think that might be a challenge for a lot of organizations right now.
Fantastic. And Jerome, last question on a slightly different note. What are the 2 most frustrating things you find working with HR people? Ross and Sasha not included.
I've had this conversation with Jerome, so
no, it's not really frustration. It's sometimes HR people can be very reluctant to change because, and HR is a actual discipline. You go and study HR. You can have degree, masters, etc. EX is a bit more obscure. It's not. It's not like it's a science. So there's a degree on EX. So sometimes it can be a bit difficult to gain credibility with a pure HR audience. So it's more about the frustration is around the convincing and explaining how employee experience can enhance what HR is doing as opposed to replace what HR is doing. And sometimes HR can be a bit worried about their role and whether ES could just replace them, but it's not. I see it as just an enhancement as opposed to a replacement.
So Jerome, you're not taking anybody's job, so that's good. Good to hear. So, hey, thanks everyone, and especially to the panel for participating. I think we had a great discussion here, but also on the chat window. And the next steps are on the screen. Please follow EX Assembly. I think there's good stuff coming through, but also the panelist on LinkedIn. So thanks very much to the panelist and all of you for taking your time. And hopefully it's been worth it. There is a link to give the feedback. If you can give us feedback, that'll be really valuable. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend coming through. Thanks, Jerome. Thanks, Sasha.
Thanks, Jivan.
Much.
Thank you. Thank you.